Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Gift of Psychosynthesis with me, Jamie Carroll. Today, I'm joined again by Ann GILA, co-author of a number of classic psychosynthesis works, including The Primal Wound and A Psychotherapy of Love. So welcome, Ann.
Thank you.
And today we're going to do a short video where we're going to have a go at describing psychosynthesis, and specifically answering the classic question, what is it? So, and I always think this is a pretty difficult question to answer. I think because so often one wonders, is it a technique, a psychology, a broad approach? Lots of people who are in the psychosynthesis world like to talk about the egg diagram, the star. It gets quite complex and a bit much, really. And I really just want to try and get over for somebody who's perhaps interested in doing therapy and they've heard of psychosynthesis, but they don't know much about it. What is it without it being overly theoretical? What would they expect to see as well, perhaps in therapy rooms? Um, so I'm just going to try and do a short summary as a sort of a starter for 10, and then I'll let you sort of come in and take over really and say what you feel would be a nice short definition, if we can, of what is psychosynthesis. So what I've written down here is, and this quote is just adapted from an astrologer actually who called Greg Bogart, who's also very much into psychosynthesis. And he describes it as the process of learning to receive transformative, reorganizing energies from a higher unconscious. Um, so for me, psychosynthesis is about tuning in to something higher than ourselves. And the goal is really then to transform or take these energies that we're receiving, and transform them into action that can make our lives better. Um, and I've always sort of say with psychosynthesis, a starting assumption is that there genuinely exists something higher than conscious mind that we can connect with. So psychosynthesis calls it self. Last time we spoke, you sort of talked about the relationship between me and my God, where self is another word for God. I think of it as me and my soul, but I don't think that really matters. I think what psychosynthesis isn't prescriptive about what this higher thing is. The thing that's important is that it's like the source of our psychological healing. If we connect with it, we can we can learn to live a better life and heal ourselves. So that for me is my effort of trying to describe psychosynthesis. And I would just say one more thing, which is like a practical thing that you would see in the psychosynthesis therapy rooms is an effort by the therapist to encourage their client to gradually, as they explore who they are, to step away from their unconscious identification with our subpersonalities. And that then frees us to start acting in ways that we're more conscious use of our will. So that's my go at summarizing psychosynthesis. I'm not sure how successful that was, but I'm just putting that out there as a first go. And I'm interested to hear from you how you would describe it to the layperson.
Well, I think I go back to Jolie a few sentences that he wrote about psychosynthesis. And maybe it's talking about the purpose of psychosynthesis, but these are three things that he mentions. And I'm looking at his book right now. That's why it's going to take me just a second to find what he wrote. So Jolie, when he was writing about psychosynthesis for one of the first chapters of his book, talks about addressing basically the suffering that people experience in life. And he lays out, as we discussed in another video, the stages for addressing that suffering. But he says that what the person is trying to do, what we are trying to do through psychosynthesis is achieving, and I'm going to use his terms, his words here, harmonious integration, integrating all the different aspects of our personality, achieving true self-realization, meaning achieving our connection to whatever we consider the greater or the divine, and right relationships with others. Those are the three things he mentions. So achieving harmonious integration, our connection to the greater, whatever the greater is, and right relationship with others. And I think that that captures what psychosynthesis is about, those three things. And then he goes into talking about the stages, which I already said we discussed in another video.
Can we just unpack those? I think that was lovely. Thank you for diving in with Assagioli and getting those three. You talked about harmonious integration as the first one.
Mhm.
Do you just kind of say a little bit more about that?
Um, from a psychosynthesis perspective, what it means is being aware of the different aspects of our personality. And usually for many people, there's conflict between various aspects of our personalities. And it is working toward bringing about harmony among those different aspects. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, hence I suppose that it's called psychosynthesis, synthesizing.
Psycho.
Mhm.
Yeah. So working with them in whatever ways we know how to address that conflict that exists within us in
And then
order to achieve that harmony, inner harmony.
and then the second one you said was true self-realization.
Yeah, but that was his term. And what I was saying is that for how I would explain that term, it's achieving or knowing our deepest connection, or our connection to the greater, whatever we consider the greater, and whatever we call it, whether we call it self, whether we call it higher self, whether we call it God, whether we call it goddess, whether we call it presence, whether we call it the divine, or whether we call it nature, the universe, but realizing or achieving an awareness of our connection to that.
Yeah, and that comes back to that point I was making about that connection being the source of our psychological healing. But when we realize it, that helps unlock our healing. And then the third point you said was right relations.
With others, yeah.
Yeah. And could you say just a little bit more about that for those who might not have heard that term before?
Right relationship. It's interesting because he doesn't actually expand on that. And so, I mean, I just make assumptions about it. Right relationship with others. If I got down to if I got down to the depth of what I believe right relationship with others means, I think it's really having empathy for every other human being, no matter who or what.
Mm.
Empathy for the criminal, empathy for the sage, empathy for, the ordinary person, empathy for everyone.
Could I add something to that as well? Because I heard it described as like the double golden rule, and it's like empathy for everyone, but also empathy for ourselves, because that's the bit we often forget. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Mm. Oh, thank you. That was really succinct and exactly what I was after. That was wonderful. I was also just wonder um, whether you could just say a little bit more about what it's like then to be in therapy, in psychosynthesis therapy, because as we were discussing off camera beforehand, if somebody came up to the window and uh, uh saw somebody in a room with you or I working whilst they at first they wouldn't see anything that's different from any other school of therapy. It wouldn't seem that different, and yet there are differences there. So how would you sort of describe the experience?
Wow, that is so hard to answer. Um, I mean, it really depends on the psychosynthesis therapist. I mean, and what their history is, what their background is. Um, boy, I mean, I don't know that you could say that if you looked at this room and that if you had 10 rooms lined up and there was a psychosynthesis therapist in each of those rooms and you were looking in on them, I don't know what you would see that would be different necessarily. I mean, I don't know what you would see that would be necessarily common enough that you could say that's psychosynthesis therapy. Um, I mean, I have to say that, when I was first in psychosynthesis training and in the early days of my psychosynthesis life, there was much more of an orientation toward an agenda, holding an agenda for the client. I'm very different from that now. So I don't know that, it's really hard to answer that question. The only thing I could say maybe is that as a psychosynthesis therapist, I'm not only open to the pain and suffering and what in psychosynthesis we might call lower unconscious content of the person, but I'm also open to the joy and the love and what we would call higher qualities or of what we in psychosynthesis call the higher unconscious. So that I'm open to bringing both, open to hearing both in the room and supporting both in the room if they're both present in terms of what the client is talking about or sharing. So when a client might be talking about, even a client who's come in with a lot of pain, we've been working and addressing whatever that's about, and then they come in from having just had a day at the beach where they had this experience of connection or of love of all or whatever, or maybe they just come in from a vacation and they're feeling a calmness and a serenity that they haven't expressed up to that point. I don't pass over it. I include it. Tell me about that experience of serenity that you had there when you were in Hawaii. Californians go to Hawaii. So I don't pass over that. I give it equal play in a sense, equal time, and encourage. I don't know if encourage, but what was the word? Anyway, I can't think of the right word. But I mean, so that might be a difference. That, and I don't know that other therapies probably highlight that in the same way. And I don't even know if all psychosynthesis therapists highlight it. I mean, someone, another example for me is this has happened and it's happened by my other psychosynthesis colleagues I know. Someone comes into the room and says, I've just fallen in love. And this person is just, and they're expressing, and they just met this person. This is the person of my life, and there can be a tendency to inside oneself to say, oh my goodness, they just met them. How do they know? Whatever. No, tell me about the experience you feel of that love for that person. Not to diminish it or try to change it in any way, but tell me about your feelings of love, or so anyway, something like that.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether the context of that spiritual context of holding, some that sort of that idea that you're seeing a spiritual being in front of you,
Yeah.
is allowing you to have that degree of patience and that willingness to explore because you know that you don't know everything about the person in front of you because they're a spiritual being. They're channeling information just as we all
Uh-huh.
that that is privy to that person. So that person, let's say take that example of falling in love, they're channeling an experience that it could be very unique to them based on what their promptings they're getting from their self, their wiser part. And so, like you're saying, the human inside you goes, "Oh God, do you come on? It's a bit early to be spouting all this." But perhaps that there's this wider part of you, the self is like, okay, no, then maybe there's something here that I need to hold that they're actually seeing. Would that be do you think that's what's going on there?
Yeah, except that I would probably word it a little bit differently. I would just probably word it in this way, which is to say that I know that within this person is higher and lower. There's joy and there's pain in every individual. And so I welcome both. I don't, I don't necessarily focus on one over the other. I focus on what the client wants to focus on, but I, in some way, express to the client an invitation also to be aware of both, if they're present in some way. So the person who's just come in from the vacation and talks about the serenity they experienced on their vacation, I'm open to that. They come in and they express the pain of a conflict they just had with their partner, I'm open to that. So I'm open to the whole range. And therapy tends, in general, not just psychosynthesis, tends to focus on the lower unconscious content, because usually a person is motivated to come in because of pain. So then we get stuck in focusing on pain and forget that there's more to the person than that. So if the person happens to mention the more, I want to also reflect that. That's the word I was looking for before, is reflect that.
And I also wonder whether that then links to another uh, characteristic of some psychosynthesis therapy anyway, which is that awareness. We were just talking in another video about the 5 stages of consciousness, whether as a therapist holding that awareness that there are different levels and they're all valid and worth exploring. That seemed to be what you were talking about there, but you hold everything that comes in. You're not just focused on the lower unconscious or the stage 0 survival stuff, that you
Mhm.
prepared to work with that, but also work with anything else that comes out as well that's not from a different level.
Yeah, but I have no agenda that the other has to focus on. Let's say, for example, focus on what we'll call in psychosynthesis, we call higher unconscious content, like serenity or joy or something like that. I have no agenda of that. But if it walks into the room, if it enters the room, then I'm not gonna dismiss it. I'm going to, reflect it.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, and I just wondered what my final sort of suggestion as well, which I just float to see what you think of, is also perhaps with psychosynthesis. Subpersonalities is very much associated with that, isn't it? In the therapy room, do you think that would still be something that was very a sort of a differentiator, or something that would be very much associated with psychosynthesis therapy now?
These days, not so much because of internal family systems.
Uh-huh.
So internal family systems, so much focuses on subpersonalities that a lot of people, when they hear about subpersonalities or parts, that's what they think of as internal family systems
Right.
therapy.
Mhm.
So yeah, and it's possible in psychosynthesis therapy to never discuss. Well, I want to say, because subpersonalities is such a dynamite model, and I mean it's such a useful what method technique. And that's why internal family systems is so popular. Um, that there's a tendency maybe to focus, I don't know, I'm only guessing, to focus too much on subpersonalities as such, and try to embody them more than maybe that needs to be. I mean, simply in a psychosynthesis therapy session, someone is talking about whatever they're talking about, and I'll say, what did you need in that moment? What was your, can you tell me, if you know, what you might have needed in that moment? When I ask that question, I am pointing toward a subpersonality, but I don't frame it as a subpersonality. Um, so there's a ways of doing what we call subpersonality work without necessarily concretizing that form.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I get.
And I think that maybe, I don't know, I'm only guessing, that maybe early people in psychosynthesis might concretize that form too much.
Mhm.
But I don't know that for sure. I'm only guessing.
Mhm. Oh, okay. So have we, do you think we've covered everything we can? Is there anything we've missed at our go at explaining psychosynthesis?
I don't know. I mean, you could go on and on, but what's your answer to that question?
Well, I think you've answered it in terms of what you'd expect to see in the therapy room. As you say, it's very difficult to, especially in the modern times, to differentiate. But I think what I took from it was that sense of there is some context that we're holding that is informing the sort of the questions we ask, or our just our general approach and mannerism, that does feel quite specific because it's connecting to the idea of the self. Um,
Mm.
yeah, but as you say, other than that, you probably it's very subtle, isn't it? You're not going to.
It's great. Let me just add something. Excuse me, I interrupted you just then. I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, go for it.
The thing that just came to my mind is the whole idea of journey. That I sit with a person recognizing that they're on a journey, and I think psychosynthesis, well, I don't know if it's just us or us meaning John and me, or psychosynthesis in general recognizes the journey, that whatever the person brings into the room is just that particular frame of their journey. And that I know that when I'm working with someone, that they are with me for this particular frame of their journey, and that they may do all the other frames of their journey, if they're ever will be maybe with another therapist, or maybe even without a therapist. And I'm thinking specifically about, I've heard this from students in their internships and stuff. So they get a client who has an addiction, and I'll just say alcohol. It can be any kind of addiction, and that person is still using. And there's a question about, do I continue to see somebody who's still using, or do I not? And that kind of question that comes up. And what may be happening is that in the time that that person spends with you, even though they're still using, it may be just a frame of their journey. And when you stop, and when the therapy may end, let's say after 6 months or a year or something, then that person may go on in a year or two later, seeing another therapist. And that the time that you spent with them was essential to prepare them for the future frames of their journey.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not time wasted. It's not anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
It is, and we have to have that kind of humility that person is, that we will not see much change in that person, however deeply that person may be preparing themselves to continue their journey in some other way or with some other person.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to be willing to be only a stepping stone on that journey,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and accept that we're only a stepping stone on that journey.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's a huge stepping stone.
Mm-hmm.
So journey is a significant aspect, I think, of psychosynthesis therapy, is the recognition of a journey. And I don't know that other therapies actually think of it quite in that same way.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really a significant difference. And I don't know if other psychosynthesis therapists see it the way I just expressed, but that's the way we see it.
And that also just fits as well back into the 5 stages of consciousness in a way, because it's seeing that there's these stages, but also the understanding that you say that you could be a stepping stone on any one of those, and that it might be necessary, essential for that client to have that work with you, then process it, and then have a different set of work at a different stage, or maybe at the same stage with a different therapist.
Right.
And it's as valid, but you've both therapists, or however many therapists are involved, have played their part, and having that humility to accept that, um, without hoping that somehow you the one who've healed the other person or made the breakthrough. Yeah.
That's right. And just what you said, you have to be willing to let go of the idea of breakthroughs, and that you are involved in a breakthrough
Yeah.
as a therapist, which means that as a therapist, you have to have a lot of humility.
And thank you for that.
You're welcome.
I think we've done our very best there to answer that difficult question, and let's put it out there and let's see what the viewers think, and hopefully we've helped them get some new insights on what is psychosynthesis.
Thank you.